Hello again, this is Dr. Brain. We're now going to begin the last portion of our neuroanatomical study. The very first slide of this study was a portion of the upper cervical cord around C2. We're now moving caudally in the cord, and this slide is approximately at C8. Let me point out the structures and then we'll come back to review function briefly. The posterior columns with fasciculus gracilis and the fasciculus cuneatus. The dorsal horn, the ventral horn. We have to use our imagination here to see the lateral cortical spinal tract on each side and the lateral spinothalamic tract on each side. With regard to the dorsal horns, note the very light staining substantia gelatinosa. Dorsal to this, we have an important tract called the tract of Lasauer. In the ventral horn, we have a group of nuclei. The most medial nuclei are innervating the trunk muscles, while the most lateral nuclei are innervating the shoulder, the arm, the forearm region, and this area here is probably innervating the hands. The ventral median fissure, the dorsal median sulcus, the dorsal intermediate sulcus, and the entry zone, the dorsolateral sulcus. The posterior columns are carrying vibration, two-point discrimination, and conscious proprioception. The lateral cortical spinal tracts are carrying voluntary motor information. The lateral spinothalamic tract is carrying pain and temperature information and crude touch from the body. That's pretty much it for the upper cervical cord.
I do have a question, Dr. Brain.
Oh, I'm glad we have a question. What is that question?
Well, I notice in a lot of these movies you talk about, dorsal ventral, and I know they generally mean posterior and anterior, respectively. Could those terms always be used interchangeably in every aspect of the spinal cord?
With regard to the spinal cord, yes, that's correct. If we were talking about the brain, then there would be some situations in which would prefer ventral, and other situations in which would prefer anterior. But for the spinal cord, what you're saying is essentially true.
Well, even though you say we could use them interchangeably, what do the cool guys call it? What do the real doctors call it? Anterior, posterior, or dorsal ventral?
This real doctor calls it ventral and dorsal.
Thank you, Dr. Brain.
Let's continue with our study.